All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a really scary modern phenomenon, the sophisticated digital stalker. Yeah, we're going to try to get inside the head of the kind of person who wages this long-term psychological war, all from behind a keyboard. So what kind of person does this? You probably picture some kind of criminal mastermind, right? Tucked away in a dark room, a technical genius with some grand evil plan. But the thing is, a multi-year investigation, which is the source for this whole explainer, it reveals something way more complex and honestly a lot more disturbing. So what the investigation found is that the real reason behind these crazy high-tech harassment campaigns, it's not what we see in the movies. It's not about being purely evil or some kind of natural-born criminal genius. The real answer is, well, it's a lot closer to home. It's really rooted in human psychology.
Right, let's really get into this, because this is the main idea right here. What the investigation is telling us is that we're looking at people who've taken their own deep, profound pain and just aimed it outwards, using technology as their weapon of choice. So let's unpack the psychology of how someone who's been hurt becomes a digital danger.
Okay, first up, we've got to understand this terrifying illusion of power they build. It's like they build this digital fortress around themselves, and believe me, it is armed to the teeth. The tools they use aren't just for hacking. They're designed to terrorize.
Now look at this. This is not just a shopping list of hacking tools, no way. This is a straight-up playbook for psychological warfare. I mean, think about it. Custom malware built specifically to make a victim question their own sanity. AI systems that just automate harassment 24/7. And encrypted networks where they can all coordinate their attacks. The level of sophistication here, it really suggests that at least some of these folks have had formal training. They've learned how to turn their tech skills into weapons of mental manipulation.
But, and this is the big twist, this powerful, super intimidating digital mask, it's hiding a completely different reality. The person behind that screen, the one who seems so terrifying, they're often the complete opposite of powerful.
And this right here, this is the core paradox of the digital predator. The investigation shows us people who are just completely dominant and in control when they're behind a keyboard. But in the real world, it's a whole other story. We're talking about people who often can't handle basic social situations, who suffer from just cripplingly low self-esteem, and who have a long history of being rejected or even being abused themselves. That keyboard, it lets them be the person they could never, ever be face-to-face.
Okay, so how does somebody even get to this point, right? How does that insecure person we just talked about turn into this online monster? The research points to a really clear, tragic, and honestly predictable pattern. It's like a pipeline that starts way, way before they ever even learned how to code.
And look, this isn't just a guess. The research is super clear on this. The biggest predictors for this kind of behavior, a history of childhood abuse, which can lead to really serious issues like attachment dysfunction, that's basically being unable to form healthy relationships, and something psychologists call weak ego strength, which is just this core feeling of instability. This stuff, this is the psychological bedrock. All that pain becomes the fuel for everything they do later.
Yeah, and as one of the lead researchers on this case said, this isn't just some random person being cruel for fun. This targeted, obsessive harassment, it's a direct reflection of the trauma they've been through themselves. They are, in a very real way, just weaponizing their own suffering.
So that trauma, it builds and builds into this really vicious cycle. It all starts with that original pain, which leads to this kind of psychological breakdown. Then they pick up tech skills, and suddenly they have this new sense of power. And then they pick a target. And it's often someone who's successful, someone who represents everything they feel they aren't. And that's when the harassment kicks off. And what's really fascinating, in a dark way, is that the act of doing all this, it can actually inflict a new kind of trauma on them, which just locks them even tighter into this destructive loop.
So all that deep-seated trauma, it doesn't just hang out. It gets channeled. It gets focused into two main, really toxic motivations that drive literally everything they do. Their harassment is absolutely never random. It is a targeted campaign fueled by two things. First, revenge. They see someone else succeeding, and to them, it's like a giant spotlight on their own failures. And that success, it makes them furious. The second driver is this obsessive need for control. If they can't control their own lives, they will try to completely totally dominate someone else's life, twisting their reality just to feel powerful for a moment.
A forensic psychologist who consulted on this investigation pointed this exact thing out. When the victim doesn't break, when they actually keep on thriving despite all the attacks, it makes the perpetrators absolutely livid. That person's resilience becomes this constant, infuriating mirror, reflecting their own feelings of being a failure.
Okay, but here is the most crucial point. The exact same psychological issues that create these digital predators, well, they also carry the seeds of their own downfall. So their greatest strength, this ability to wage psychological war, is also their absolute greatest weakness.
Now, in cases where these people work in groups, they don't form healthy teams. Not at all. They operate more like cults, held together by this thing called trauma bonding. It's this really intense but super unstable loyalty that's built on shared pain and manipulation, usually by some kind of charismatic leader. And any bond that's built on pain, it's incredibly fragile. It's just waiting to shatter.
And this is exactly what investigators are seeing on the ground. The whole structure just starts to crumble under the weight of its own toxic psychology. Paranoia gets completely out of control. They start fighting with each other, their mental health tanks, and they begin to make these simple, fear-driven mistakes. And understanding this self-destruct button is so important because the scale of this problem, it's just staggering.
And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. This matters because this psychological profile, it applies to a massive and growing crisis. Some estimates say that over 1 million people, mostly women, are stalked every single year in the US alone. And cyberstalking, well, that's the fastest growing part of it.
So where does that leave us? What's the final takeaway? Understanding the mind of a digital predator, it's not just about catching bad guys. It's about seeing the deep, profound vulnerability and pain that's fueling all that aggression. And that insight, that might just be the most powerful tool we have. Not just for stopping them, but for predicting, preventing, and maybe, just maybe, finally breaking these awful, devastating cycles of violence.